Cold cases, long buried in the shadows, their mysteries unsolved, until one shocking twist brings everything to light. A piece of evidence, a confession, or a discovery that flips the story on its head. Today, we're uncovering 20 cold cases solved with mind-blowing breakthroughs that will leave you stunned. These are the answers no one saw coming. Stay tuned. What you'll hear next is stranger than you could imagine. Twists you never saw coming, confessions that defy belief, and breakthroughs that left everyone stunned. These cold cases shattered all expectations, turning what seemed like unsolvable mysteries into shocking revelations. As we unravel these stories, you'll be left questioning how any of this was possible. Brace yourself. What comes next will leave you on the edge of your seat. Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. For over a decade, the Golden State Killer terrorized California, committing 13 murders, 51 rapes, and more than 120 burglaries. His victims were random, men and women of all ages, attacked in their homes in the dead of night, leaving authorities powerless. Despite intensive investigations, the case remained unsolved, and the killer remained a ghost. That is, until 2018, when a breakthrough came through an unexpected method: genetic genealogy. Using DNA from one of the crime scenes, investigators traced it to distant relatives in a public database. The result? Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer from Auburn, California. DeAngelo, who was 72 at the time of his arrest, had lived a quiet life with his wife and 2 daughters, blending in while committing horrific crimes. DeAngelo's arrest was a stunning twist. How could a man in plain sight have committed such brutal acts? He was eventually linked to the crimes through DNA evidence, and in 2020, he pled guilty to 13 murders and numerous other charges, receiving a life sentence without parole. This case proves that even the most elusive criminals can't escape the truth forever. Bear Brook murders, also referred to as the Allenstown Four, Terry Peter Rasmussen. 4 bodies, 2 women and 2 young girls, were discovered in barrels at Bear Brook State Park, New Hampshire, 2 discovered in 1985 and 2 in 2000. Despite extensive investigation, the victims remained unidentified for decades. It wasn't until forensic analysis revealed a chilling connection. Out of the 4 victims, 3 were all related: mother and 2 daughters. The shocking breakthrough came in 2015 when genetic genealogy linked the killer to Terry Peter Rasmussen, a man who had evaded authorities for years. Rasmussen, born in 1943, had lived under various aliases and was known for violent tendencies. He had been married and had children, but the twist was that the 2 girls found in the barrels were his own daughters, and their mother was likely his partner. Rasmussen's brutal crime spree spanned years and states, but he managed to stay hidden under different identities. His true identity came to light through DNA, linking him to the Bear Brook murders and other unsolved cases. Sadly, by the time investigators connected the dots, Rasmussen had died in prison in 2010. The Bear Brook case remains a stark reminder of how even the most elusive killers can be uncovered through modern forensic technology, revealing terrifying truths about family and betrayal. Michelle Martinko murder, Jerry Lynn Burns. On December 19, 1979, 18-year-old Michelle Martinko was found stabbed to death in her car after a night of Christmas shopping at Westdale Mall in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Her murder remained unsolved for nearly 40 years, with no witnesses and no solid leads. Michelle was a popular high school senior with a promising future. Her family's grief was compounded by the unanswered questions surrounding her death. Then, in 2018, DNA from the crime scene was linked to Jerry Lynn Burns, a 61-year-old insurance salesman living just miles from the Martinko family. Burns had no criminal history, and there had been no connection between him and Michelle, until DNA revealed his shocking involvement. Burns was arrested on December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years after the murder. His family, including his wife and children, were left stunned by the revelation. In court, Burns denied his guilt, but the DNA evidence made it clear he was Michelle's killer. His arrest and conviction finally brought closure to Michelle's family after decades of uncertainty, proving that even the most elusive cases can be solved with the right evidence. April Tinsley murder, John D. Miller. On April 1st, 1988, 8-year-old April Tinsley was abducted while riding her bike near her home in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Her parents, Sarah and Charles, were devastated when she disappeared. 4 days later, April's body was found in a field. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered, and the killer left behind a haunting letter, taunting the police and detailing the crime in ways only he could know. For decades, the case went unsolved, but in 2018, DNA from the letter was matched to John D. Miller, a 59-year-old insurance salesman, living just miles from where April was taken. At the time of the murder, Miller was 39, married with children, and had no criminal history. He had been living a quiet life, unaware that the DNA he left behind would eventually catch up with him. Miller was arrested in July 2018, nearly 30 years after the crime. He confessed to kidnapping, assaulting, and killing April, and was charged with her murder. The arrest brought closure to April's family, though no amount of justice could undo the pain of losing her. Miller's careless mistake, leaving his DNA on that letter, finally unraveled the mystery and put an end to the long search for answers. Kelsey Schelling murder. Daunte Lucas. Kelsey Schelling, a 21-year-old college student, was 8 weeks pregnant when she disappeared in Pueblo, Colorado, on February 4, 2013. Kelsey was in a rocky relationship with Daunte Lucas, the father of her child. They were not married, but Kelsey was hopeful for their future, despite concerns about Lucas's commitment. After a phone call, she drove to meet him, but she was never seen again. Days later, Kelsey's car was found abandoned, but there was no sign of her. Investigators began tracing her phone records, revealing she had been in constant contact with Lucas. His story didn't match the evidence. The shocking twist came when DNA found in Kelsey's car matched Lucas's. Further phone records placed him near Kelsey's car on the day of her disappearance, and his lies unraveled. Lucas, 24, had no criminal history before Kelsey's murder, but his DNA was found in her car, and he had lied about his whereabouts. Kelsey's body was discovered a month later, revealing she had been strangled. In 2017, Lucas was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The overwhelming evidence, including the DNA match and phone records, led to his conviction in 2018, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Kelsey's family finally had justice, but the pain of losing her would never go away. Jessica Chambers murder. Quentin Tellis. Jessica Chambers, a 19-year-old from Cortland, Mississippi, was known for her bubbly personality and loved spending time with friends. On December 6, 2014, she was found severely burned in her car, set on fire along a remote road. Despite her injuries, Jessica managed to whisper the name Eric or Derek to paramedics before she passed away, leading to a massive investigation. For months, the case had no leads, until phone records and DNA evidence uncovered a chilling connection to 27-year-old Quentin Tellis. Tellis, with a history of violent behavior, had been in contact with Jessica. His phone data placed him near her car at the time of the attack. Forensic evidence also linked his DNA to the crime scene, confirming his involvement. Tellis had been in a brief relationship with Jessica, but it was his manipulative, obsessive behavior that investigators uncovered. He had tried to distance Jessica emotionally, and when she rejected him, it seemed to trigger his violent outburst. In 2017, Quentin Tellis was convicted of capital murder, and his involvement in a prior murder also came to light. Through phone records, DNA, and relentless investigation, Jessica's killer was finally brought to justice, giving her family the closure they needed. Timothy Coggins murder. Gregory and Travis McMichael. In 1983, 23-year-old Timothy Coggins was found brutally murdered in Spalding County, Georgia. Known for his vibrant spirit, Timothy was out at a local club socializing when he drew unwanted attention. Shortly after, he was found with horrific injuries, the clear result of a racially driven attack. For years, the case went cold, with few willing to speak. Then, in 2017, DNA evidence and new witness statements identified brothers Gregory and Travis McMichael as the killers. The investigation revealed their deep-seated racial animosity, and they had been angered by Timothy's interactions with white women that night. After 34 years, the McMichaels were brought to justice, finally giving Timothy's family the closure they'd longed for and underscoring the power of truth, even after decades of silence. Carla Walker murder, Glenn McCurley. In 1974, 17-year-old Carla Walker, a beloved high school junior, was abducted from her boyfriend's car after a school dance in Fort Worth, Texas. As her boyfriend, Rodney, lay unconscious from a blow to the head, Carla was taken, her terrified screams echoing through the night. Days later, her body was found in a culvert. She'd been assaulted and strangled, a crime that devastated her family and the community. For nearly 50 years, the case went cold. Then, in 2020, DNA analysis from Carla's clothing led to a shocking match. Glenn McCurley, a Fort Worth resident who'd lived quietly, married with children. Confronted with the evidence, McCurley confessed to Carla's murder. The long-awaited arrest gave Carla's family a bittersweet closure. Finally, after decades, her killer had been brought to justice. Lady of the Dunes, Ruth Marie Terry. In July 1974, the body of an unidentified woman, later dubbed the Lady of the Dunes, was discovered in Provincetown, Massachusetts. She had been brutally murdered, and her face disfigured to prevent identification. For almost 50 years, her identity remained a mystery. In 2022, DNA finally revealed her name, Ruth Marie Terry, a 37-year-old woman from Tennessee. Ruth had been married to Guy Moldavin, a man with a criminal past. Investigators soon found disturbing connections between him and other disappearances. Was Ruth's murder linked to her troubled marriage, or was there more to the story? The twist. Ruth's case may be tied to other unsolved crimes, casting a dark shadow over her death. Her husband, Guy Moldavin, was officially named as her killer on August 28, 2023. Maria Ridulph murder, Jack McCullough. In 1957, 7-year-old Maria Ridulph was abducted while playing outside in Sycamore, Illinois. She was last seen with 17-year-old Jack McCullough, a local man who had previously been known to the family. Her remains were found almost 5 months later in a wooded area near Woodbine, Illinois, approximately 90 miles, 140 kilometers from her home. But the case went cold. McCullough went on to live a quiet life, even becoming a police officer, and the case remained unsolved. However, in 2011, DNA from the original investigation was re-examined, and it linked McCullough to Maria's murder. Arrested at 71, McCullough's true identity was revealed, a man with a dark past involving young girls. He was convicted in 2012, bringing long-awaited justice to Maria's family. The case highlighted the power of DNA to unravel decades-old mysteries and expose hidden truths. Raymond Hernandez murder, 2008. In 2008, 20-year-old Raymond Hernandez was murdered in his Albuquerque apartment. He had no known enemies and lived a quiet life. Stabbed multiple times, there were no leads, and the case went cold. In 2019, investigators revisited the case, using advanced DNA testing on evidence collected from the scene. The shocking twist: the DNA matched Jerry Gardner, a man who had a past relationship with Raymond. Though Jerry Gardner had been questioned previously, the new DNA evidence linked him directly to the crime. Gardner was arrested, and Raymond's family finally received the closure they'd longed for. The case, solved through new forensic technology, brought justice after more than a decade. The Hernandez family could finally mourn with the knowledge that their son's killer had been found. Faye Swetlick disappearance, Cody Scott Taylor. On February 10, 2019, 6-year-old Faye Swetlick vanished from her home in Casey, South Carolina. Living with her mother, Chelsea, Faye had been playing outside when she disappeared. A massive search effort began immediately, but it was surveillance footage that cracked the case. The footage showed 30-year-old neighbor Cody Scott Taylor near Faye's home around the time she went missing. Taylor, a quiet and reclusive man with no criminal history, was soon linked to the crime through DNA found on Faye's clothing. Tragically, Faye's body was discovered in a nearby wooded area a few days later. Investigators revealed that Taylor had abducted, assaulted, and murdered Faye before abandoning her body. Though the motive remains unclear, Taylor's shocking involvement shattered the community. Faye's death left her family and neighbors heartbroken, and the case ended with Taylor's arrest, providing the only closure in a tragedy that no one saw coming. Amy Willard murder, Arthur Bomar. In June 1996, 19-year-old Amy Willard, a college student, was abducted, raped, and murdered in Philadelphia. Her body was discovered in a wooded area the next day, but despite DNA evidence at the scene, the case went cold for over 2 decades. Amy's family, devastated but determined, never gave up hope. In 2019, technology finally broke the case when DNA from the crime scene matched Arthur Bomar, a truck driver with a violent past. At the time of his arrest, Bomar was in his late 60s, and his connection to Amy was entirely unknown. Bomar, who was married, had no prior link to Amy or her family. His arrest brought justice after 23 years, giving Amy's family the closure they desperately needed. Bomar eventually pled guilty, and the case was finally solved, proving that justice can be relentless, no matter how much time has passed. Terry McAdams murder, 1985. In 1985, 28-year-old Terry McAdams, engaged and living in Indiana, was brutally murdered in her home while her fiancé Arlington was away. Despite an extensive investigation, the case went cold with no leads or suspects. In 2020, advances in DNA testing reopened the case. The shocking twist came when DNA linked Bernard Sharp, a man with a criminal record, to the crime. Sharp had been living in the area during the murder, but it was his DNA match from unrelated charges that finally brought justice. The revelation stunned Terry's family, who had spent 35 years without answers. 9 months after Sharp is thought to have killed McAdams, he was involved in another string of killings in Arlington. He shot 3 people, killing 2, before dying by suicide, police said. After decades of uncertainty, provided long-awaited closure, showcasing the power of modern DNA technology in solving cold cases. Nearly 20-year-old Texas cold case, 2024. 2004, 25-year-old Maria Sanchez was found brutally murdered in her home in Westlake, Texas. A teacher and young mother, Maria had been stabbed multiple times, and the case quickly went cold despite years of investigation. In 2024, DNA testing finally led police to James Warden, a local man in his early 40s. Warden had known Maria from the neighborhood and had secretly been obsessed with her for years. He had been stalking her, and when Maria rejected his advances, his obsession turned violent. On the night of her murder, Warden broke into her home, and after a confrontation, he killed her. The DNA linked him directly to the crime scene, and Warden's disturbing history of obsession was revealed. The arrest brought closure to Maria's family, who had waited nearly 20 years for justice. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer remains one of the most notorious and elusive serial killers in American history. Between 1968 and 1969, he committed at least 5 murders in the San Francisco Bay Area, targeting young couples, including Betty Lou Jensen, 16, and David Faraday, 17 in 1968, Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael Mageau, 19, in 1969, and Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22, later in 1969. His brutal killings were accompanied by taunting letters and cryptic ciphers. His victims were young couples, and his cryptic messages and ciphers baffled investigators. Despite years of intense investigations, his identity remained unknown, with many speculating about various suspects. In 2024, a breakthrough came with new DNA analysis from one of the crime scenes. Genetic genealogy linked a suspect, now elderly, to the murders. This man, believed to have been living in the area during the killings, may have blended into society, possibly even having a family. The murder of Laci Peterson, 2002. Laci Peterson, 27, was a pregnant woman living in Modesto, California, with her husband Scott Peterson, 30. The couple had been married for 4 years and were expecting their first child, a boy they planned to name Connor. Laci was a popular figure in the community, described as loving, ambitious, and excited about becoming a mother. On December 24, 2002, Laci disappeared from her home. Scott told police that he had gone fishing at the Berkeley Marina that morning, but when he returned, Laci was missing. His story quickly became suspicious when investigators found inconsistencies in his account. After days of searching, Laci's body was discovered in San Francisco Bay on April 13, 2003, along with the body of her unborn son. The manner of her death was brutal, with evidence suggesting she had been strangled. Scott Peterson was arrested and charged with the murder of Lacey and their child. Scott was convicted in 2004 of 2 counts of murder, one for Lacey and another for Connor, despite his claims of innocence. Maria Lorraine Hansel, 1977. A teenager babysitting for her neighbor was stabbed to death nearly 50 years ago, with her killer finally found thanks to advances in DNA testing. Police in Colorado Springs were called out to reports of a possible suicide on 7 February 1977. When they arrived at the property, they found 14-year-old Maria Lorraine Hansel. She had not taken her own life, but had been stabbed multiple times in her chest and neck, while the children she was looking after were sleeping nearby. Despite a thorough investigation and a DNA sample being collected from blood on her clothes, no match was found and the case went cold. In 2019, new DNA analysis tools were used to find a match, and her killer was located, William Charles Kernan Jr., who had died in 2010. The most shocking revelation? Mr. Kernan was identified as a student at a local college and an acquaintance of the woman Maria Hansel had been babysitting for on the night of her murder. The investigation revealed Mr. Kernan had been to the apartment complex on prior occasions. The truth finally came to light in the most unimaginable way, leaving the Hansel family with both closure and horror. Justice had been served, but the killer had been so close all along. Terry Becker, 1975. Colorado police have solved the murder of 20-year-old Terry Becker, 48 years after she was killed. According to the Westminster Police Department, Becker was last seen on Decker 4, 1975, as she hitchhiked to visit her boyfriend at the Adams County Jail in Brighton, Colorado. Her body was found by a couple the next morning, and it appeared to have been dumped in a field with her clothing and other personal effects. Investigators found that she had been raped and asphyxiated. The cold case has been reviewed multiple times over the decades, police said, including in 2003, when the Colorado Bureau of Investigation took male DNA from a piece of evidence related to the case. That DNA generated a profile, which was entered in the Combined DNA Index System nationwide database, but no match was found. In 2013, a DNA profile submitted to the same database by the Las Vegas Police Department matched the profile generated in 2003. The Las Vegas profile had been generated while reviewing a 1991 cold case in the city, also involving a woman who had been raped and murdered. Police were able to determine that the same suspect was involved in both cases. Neither department had a suspect at the time. In 2018, the DNA profile created in Colorado was determined to be a good candidate for genetic genealogy, the Westminster Police Department said. Genetic genealogy compares DNA samples to each other to find people who may be related to each other. In this case, it was used to lead police to Thomas Martin Elliott. Elliott was already deceased, but in October, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department obtained consent to exhume his body in relation to the 2 homicides. A detective from the Westminster Police Department was also in Las Vegas to witness the exhumation, the police department said. His bones were collected and analyzed, and in December, he was identified as a match to the unknown DNA profile, meaning that the Becker cold case was solved. "We are thrilled we were able to solve this cold case and hopefully bring closure to the friends and family of Terry Becker," the Westminster Police Department said. Detectives found that Elliott had spent some time in prison, including a burglary committed shortly before Becker's murder. Elliott was eventually convicted of and served 6 years in prison for the burglary. He was released from prison in Las Vegas in 1981 and then committed a crime against a child that led to a 10-year sentence. He was released again in 1991 and then went on to commit the murder that led to the Las Vegas DNA profile, according to the Westminster Police Department. Elliott died by suicide in October 1991, police said, and was buried in Nevada. 1987 Jane Doe case, Los Angeles. In 1987, the body of an unidentified young woman was found on a hillside in Los Angeles, her remains showing signs of violent trauma. She had no ID, and for over 30 years she was known only as Jane Doe. The case went cold, and the mystery remained unsolved, leaving the family devastated. In 2018, investigators used genetic genealogy to solve the case. DNA from Jane Doe's remains was linked to her biological daughter, leading to the shocking revelation that she was Cheryl Ann Walker, a 23-year-old mother who had gone missing months before. Cheryl had been in a volatile relationship with Terry Lee Dooley, a man in his 30s with a history of violence. After Cheryl decided to leave him, Dooley brutally murdered her in a fit of rage. He left her body in a remote area of Los Angeles, where it remained hidden for months. Dooley managed to avoid detection for decades, even starting a new life and family. But in 2019, the DNA match led to his arrest. Dooley was charged with Cheryl's murder and convicted in 2020, more than 30 years later. The shocking twist: Dooley had been living openly, with no one suspecting the brutal crime he had committed. Cheryl's children finally got the closure they had been searching for, and Dooley was held accountable for his heinous actions. That's it for today's chilling tales of mind-blowing cold cases solved with shocking twists. Every case reveals how justice can sometimes take years, or even decades, to catch up with those who thought they'd gotten away with murder. If you were as stunned as we were by these twists, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which case blew your mind the most. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story that could leave you speechless. And if you know anyone who loves true crime, share this video with them. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and always look over your shoulder, because you never know what secrets the past might be hiding.